This is Molly. I wanted to do a short video about Martha Keron going. Tammy had asked me to share some facts, and actually, I really thought I needed to discuss it because a lot of it you have to do background to understand what happened. This is on this screen was one of the first things I found out, and we will be going through this. Her basic information. Martha Karen Huppick Going was born either July 4th or July 24th. I have two different places with two different ways of saying it. In Union County, South Carolina. She was the daughter of, and she died between 1865 and 1866. We have not found the bonds of death, any papers that detail exactly when she died. And I think that's one of the biggest questions that Tammy, Marianne, and I all have, that we're not really sure. We've heard, I know Marianne shared that someone there had said she was murdered, and I may have an explanation for that. I'm not sure, but we'll see. So she died between 1865 and 1866 because of some of the paperwork I have from the probate records of Mark Hames and Isaac Hames. It kind of puts her death in between those two dates. She was the daughter of Isaac Goen and Rebecca Palmer from Union County. Now, one of the Palmers was in the Revolutionary War, which this paper that I've got up here, John Palmer, they were using this paper to prove who he was. And it says it was handwritten on both sides in the Bible of Mrs. Walter F. Going, gives her address, whose late husband was the grandson of William George Washington Going, which was Martha's brother. So it shows this family, and under Isaac, they had 11 children, and Martha is one of them. Now, in the paperwork I have, she was not the youngest one. So it's interesting that this shows her as the youngest one. In some of the paperwork, D.D. Goen is in one of the probate records. So these people were all involved in her life. But it shows here Keren, and that could be a typo, and Hapuk as a part of her name, which is where I got that, the name, and I actually added it to my genealogy program because it's probably a family name from way past in the back. And her name is so unusual. Anyway, all of this family had the most unusual names. She married Isaac Hames, son of Mark and Margaret. I don't have Margaret's last name. I think it's one of those in the mid 1800s. They didn't always give the wife's name. And I don't think it was in the Hames book, but I can go back and check. Right now, we're not talking about Margaret and Mark Hames. But Isaac was their son. They lived near each other. I haven't found any marriage bonds for Martha and Isaac yet. But since John Thomas was born in 1858, most likely they were married between 1856 and 1857. That's probably the most likely time, but I haven't found any marriage bonds or license or any of those things as of yet. And now on Isaac, he joined the Confederate Army. I cannot find out whether it was 1861 or 1862, but it almost has to be 1862 because, or at least at the end of 1861, because Mary Louisa was born in March of 1862. That's the youngest child. So he, go 9 months back. He had to have been there in that time frame. But he died in October of 1862. So here is a situation where this young woman has 3 children, under 5, really, all infants, and he dies. And so the rest of this information I have gathered from Mark Hames's will and some of the probate, and also then Isaac's, and it gives a lot of information about her and what happened to her. Did not tell what happened to her, but that she was missing. And this one right here, this is Mark. It's the will has been made, and they're petitioning James Galt and the family. They're petitioning to have the property sold and everything distributed between the family members. And it starts to list them. This is 1865. Mark died in 1865. Isaac died in 1862. So there's only 3 years difference between when he died and when his father died. And it lists the following people. Elizabeth was a daughter, and she's the wife of Daniel Vaughn. Susan, wife of, and it goes down here. So you get to the bottom, all of the daughters and sons. And this Mary and Amos, we know that name because that's who John Thomas ended up living with. Anyway, you get to the end of it, and it's lists, it says that, and Isaac Hames, another brother, after the intestate died in 1863. The Civil War records said he died in October 1862, but it may not have been reported to them to 1863. Anyway, leaving a widow, Martha K. Hames, and 3 children, John, and they've got Petula instead of Keturah, that's such an unusual name, and Eliza. So it lists here the daughters and the sons and all of this. So this is Mark's. Now this is Mark's petition for Mark's will to be carried out. And she is alive in 1865 because she's listed the widow. So then we go to the next one, and this is Mark's will. Also, this is another petition they are making of the same people with the same list of people, but you get to this part, and now you have the following are under age of 21. There is no Martha listed here. That's John, Petula, they still don't have Keturah, and Eliza Hames, children of Isaac, died. Martha's not even listed. So she had to have died, and this said he died in 1863, leaving a widow, but she's not. So you go over here, this is 1865, you go to 1866, when they're once again saying, hey, y'all are supposed to be carrying out this will, there is no mention of her at all. John, Keturah, Eliza Hames, children of Isaac. So she had to have died between 1865 and 1866, but the children are listed in Mark's will. Now this is the petition. It's actually the bond, a bond petition that these men would take care of the children. They're going to be guardians to the children. So this is obviously something has happened to Martha, because this is December 1865. So I'm thinking she died between that time. WGW, William George Washington, was Martha's brother. This Smith Cook, I don't know who is. And Thomas B. Going is also one of her brothers. They are giving this man $1,500 as a bond, saying that they will be above obligation, and they will be the guardian administrator of the goods, chattels, and credits of Isaac Hames deceased, to take care of the children. That was this is their, so they paid a big money. And you think about it, in 1868, 66, 60, in this time frame, $1,500 was a lot of money. So they were guaranteeing that they would watch for the children's welfare. And then they initial it at the bottom. This is obviously a copy. This one is in the same voice, but you have a different person show up. This is a guardian bond. This is, let me find the date, 68. So this is 1868. So Martha's been dead for 4 to 5 years. She died in 55, 3 years. The children are still very young, but there's a Richard Page that shows up. So her brother William is still there. And now W.W. Hames, which I think was William Wallace, but anyway, W.W. Hames shows up, and Richard Page. And the three of them are going to act in guardianship over the children. So Martha has died, and now you have the children, and they're under obligation until the children become 21. This is William George Washington going in 1901. So that's Martha's brother. I couldn't find a picture of Martha, but there are some of his. So this is the guy who was the guardian over the children. So here's where things get interesting. And there is another paper that I cannot find. But William being the guardian of her and the children, in that time frame, they had to be the guardian of the wife also. He did not take the children in his home. They are living in a boarding house. Now, I think, the more I've studied this, I actually think they were boarding with this family. But the family took them in for money. Now, if you remember on that one we just looked at, that name is there, Richard Page. So he is, this R. Page is Richard Page. And this is in 1866, so she has died. And he is boarding the three minors. $65, I guess, a month. Looks like probably, maybe that was for 3 months, from December to April. Anyway, he's boarding them, and they're giving them, they get paid to board these three children. And then again, well, maybe that's a year, or can that be possible? No. Anyway, they're getting paid. But what really, I love this when I first found this, because this is William having to tell the court how much money he spent on this family, on the children. And it says they got shoes for John, Keturah, and Eliza. So he is looking out for the money, but they're living with this Richard Page family. Now, whenever I was looking at this and thinking about this family, it just hit me hard. Here is this young woman with 3 babies. Her husband's dead. And by law in the state of South Carolina, any person that did not have a will, they died intestate, all of the land, everything they own had to be sold and paid, the bills, any debt paid, and anything left over would go to the family. So she is widowed with 3 babies, and now is kicked out of her home. Well, everything's sold, and I'll show you some of the estate papers in a little bit. I mean, everything, blankets, clothing, dishes, everything is sold at auction. So here's Richard Page again, and they're in this is their guardianship. And it says they were be guardians to the minors until they're 21. Now, this is where the estate, they do an appraisal first, and then they do the sale. So this is, I think this is the appraisal, but he's administrator. So in 65, he died in 62, and in 65, they're getting everything set up for the sale. Can you imagine going through this? She's living on board. She can't even live in her house. Everything's being sold. She's living in a boarding with this family. And this is when I was saying earlier, I wondered if that's not why she was maybe murdered. If they were living in a boarding house situation, she would not be living, who knows where these people lived. I mean, you probably could find it but she may have been more vulnerable for murder. You know, I mean, if she's living in a boarding house situation, that's not family. Now, I've not found any connection, any family connection to the Pages, to them. They're obviously friends. They obviously are people of, you know, some kind of upstanding reputation, because that Richard Page signed on the bond and put money towards the bond that he would help, you know, take care of the children. But this says it's the perishable property sold to the highest bidder, 1866. So everything in their house is being sold. And this is the appraisals of everything. And it was interesting looking at, I think they must have had a pretty good size property and a lot of stuff. They had a lot of tools, axes, plural axes, a rifle. I don't even know what some of these crosscut saw, plows, old iron, shore plows. Look at the plows he had, stretchers, old wagon, an ox ash, but I'm not sure what that is. Then all the Hames, which is the leather that goes on the horse and the mules and all that. This is what shocked me. He had slaves. They had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 slaves. Had a horse named Frank. I thought that was an interesting name for a horse. He had a cow and a calf, a white bull, a black cow. So he had quite a, I mean, if you think about that time frame, this is a pretty good lot of property here. 2 steer, 5 yearling, pigs. So he had all of this property, blacksmith tools. I kind of wondered whatever happened to all this stuff. This is, if I'm not mistaken, there was a paper that, I don't know why my papers are split, but this is the appraisal of the personal property of the children. Bed and furniture couture praised at $50. Bed and furniture to Mary Louisa, $50. But look at John Thomas. I thought this was cute. I think this is mattress and furniture, but he had a rifle, so he got a rifle. But all of this, if I'm not mistaken, they did not sell this. They let them have their bedding. I think that this is a statement of the praise value, but I think, if I'm not mistaken, they let them have that. But look at this, a small pot. All of these things, all of it sold. I don't know what a choice shote is. Heifer, cow, calf, bottles, cattle, maybe, I don't know. All of this, every corn, he had corn in the ground, looks like. All of it is being sold. But the interesting thing, if you'll notice, look how much of these are being sold to jewelry. Remember I told you jewelry going? And him, a lot of the family bought the stuff and kept it in the family. Now, whether she was able to access it, I don't know. There's some more of the things. Saddle, tobacco, cotton something. Maybe it was cotton itself. Bushels, greens, sorghum, looks like sorghum molasses maybe. Dried grapes. They had a nice farm, and lost everything. She lost it all. Armchair, 2 chairs, all of these things, all of their personal good, their chairs, all of it, teapot, pitchers, plates, all of it sold. This one really was interesting to me. They were apparently very literate. They had books, a lot of books. And, you know, in that time frame, you don't think about a lot of people living in farms really being well read. They had music books, Bible hymn books. They had a dictionary, Testament, which is probably their Bible, and it looks like J.B. bought that. A lot of books here. They had accordion. I'm like, who got the accordion? They had atlas, all of these things, spectacles, all of these items, and they all were sold. Now, I tried to follow the children. They lived with this family. Now, this is the 1870 census in August. I could not find them. I could not find them. I could not find them. Well, here they are. They're living with Richard Page and his family as John. I'm not sure what they were calling her there. Katuri, maybe, and Louise. And they've got them both at the same age, which they were not the same age. But they were living as if their last name was Page. They were living with the Page family from the time that they were put into boarding until 1870s. They were still living in that family. Now, for some reason, I had thought that William Goen had helped them, but he did not. He couldn't take them in. And I really questioned it. I don't know if you ever think about stuff like this, but I'm like, well, why in the world didn't her brother take her in? He had 11 children of his own. And I don't think there was room in his house. So then my other thought was, well, then why didn't Isaac's family take them in? Some woman and 3 little kids. Well, he died in 1865. The time they're settling Isaac's estate, Isaac's father died. And the same thing that happened to Martha and the children happened to Mark's wife. They sold everything. She lost her home. There is like 12 or 13 pages in Mark's estate of things that were sold. And so she lost everything too. She had no home to bring them to. And it really disturbs me that this happened, but that was the law in South Carolina in the mid 1800s. So the children end up living here with Richard and Rhonda Page. Now I'm looking at her age, wondering if that was his daughter, but it's probably his wife. It doesn't really say here in this one. It doesn't really say, but he was fairly prosperous. His value of his real estate and then value of his property, $1,000 for in 18 something for a house. So who knows what kind of a house it was, but they were still living there. No, but the interesting thing is something happened between 1870 and 1880, because in 1880 the children are living in the Hames family in Cherokee County. The girls are living in the northern part of when we found their graves, they were at the border near North Carolina in that graveyard up there. They were given to one of the Hameses that were up north, and John went with the Amos family, which is when his aunt and uncle. This is Molly again. After I did the other recording, I decided to do some deeper research as to why these children were living with the Pages, Richard Page and Rhoda. And as we discussed in the previous one, I wasn't sure why. I knew it was probably someone in the community that would have a good reputation. He and the other 2 men, they put up together $1,500 bond to be guardians over John Thomas and Keturah and Mary Louisa. So I figured he was somebody in the community that was trustworthy, but you never know what the situation was. So I decided to go back to the 1860 census and see if I could find the family. And this is still in Union County, but this is in Pinckney Mills, I think is the correct name of that townville. And at the bottom of the page, we find Isaac Goen, who is Martha Keron Goen's father, living with his son or grandson, I'm not sure. Elijah, and we see in this particular 1960 they listed, and Isaac is blind, so the son or grandson, whichever one it is living with him. But right next door is Richard Page and Rhoda and their oldest child, Isaac. And then they have these other children. I decided to follow up and see if there was any connection, since they're right there together. Now, this is the 1871, where we find, there at the top, we find Richard Page. We looked at this yesterday in the video yesterday. We find them living with John Couturi and Louise, as they got it here, living with Richard Page. So their mother has died. This is now, if she died in 66, say 4 years later, they're still very young. They've got that, they're both 9. Couture and Louise are 9. They're not, they're 2 years apart. But anyway, they're very young, 11 and 9 and 7. They're very young. But they're living with him. Now, in the night last night, I kept thinking about the age of Richard Page. And we had said, when we wondered why they ended up in 1880 in with the Hameses in Cherokee County. So I decided this morning to go and look Richard up and do some follow-up for him. And buddy, did I find some interesting things about him. Let's go back to this 1860s census, where we have Isaac going next door. Rhoda is Isaac's daughter. Rhoda is a going. Rhoda was Martha's sister and William George Washington Gowen's sister. So it suddenly makes sense why this family took the children in. She was younger. Now, the husband isn't. Looks like there's about 28, almost 20 years difference. She was younger. She could take them in. So it's really an interesting thing. So I decided to find out what happened. Sure enough, Rhoda died in 1871. So from 1871, she is out of the household. She's the mother, she's the housekeeper, she's all of it. And now she dies at age 49. So then I wondered, well, maybe they sent them to live with the Hameses immediately. We don't know. I have not found that information. But he dies in 1876. So both of these people who had been the guardians, the physical guardians, even though William George Washington Gowen was the financial guardian, they were physically housing them. So we know by 1876, 10 years after they took them in, both of the parents are dead. I would probably say after the mother died in 1871, these are very young children. They'd be 12 and 10 and 8, 3 very young children, and the mother has died, the woman that was the mother in the household. So more than likely, they were almost immediately sent to live with the Hameses. The other thought that kept coming to mind was the event that we know of with when John Thomas met Mary Quinn. She was Quinn then. Or Martha Quinn, excuse me. And they had a child, which is Mary Wyatt was their child. And they did not marry. And we had questioned when we were in Gaffney, they were both single. why did not they marry? So this is actually a death certificate of one of their children, Mary, and she married Sam Cole, one of their children. But it says on this death certificate that Mary White, which is the mother of Rosa, was born in Union County, which would have mean that John Thomas did not move from that Page household until after both Pages had died. And I kept questioning that, and I found this. And this is Mary's death certificate. So this is John Thomas and Martha Quinn's daughter, the illegitimate daughter. In this death certificate, she was in Cherokee County. She was born in Cherokee County. It says right here that her birthplace is Cherokee County, and it says that she lived there all of her life. So that tells us that John Thomas and Keturah and Mary Louisa were living in Cherokee County before 1878. They had to have been living there in 1877 for her to be born. Well, it's the 10th month. They had to have been there by the beginning of 1878. So now my theory goes to after he died, they were sent to live with the Hameses. I don't know that. I have not found anything that proves that, but it added a deeper understanding of John Thomas and Keturah and Mary Louisa. They had a really rough early life, but thankfully this family took them in. But then to lose the mother, a second mother within 10 years, it had to have been a very hard thing for all three of them. And I'm going to stop there and let y'all think of some other things that might be what happened.